Abu Dhabi International Petroleum Exhibition and Conference is underway with experts gathering to address challenges worldwide. Rahmat Idris spoke with the chairman of World Energy Council on expectations for the biggest climate conference to take place in Brazil end of this month. Let's join in the dialogue.
Well, joining us today is the chairman of the World Energy Council and former CEO of COP28 Dubai. He is a distinguished Kenyan economist, diplomat, widely recognized for his leadership in global energy transition and sustainable development. As the founding director general of the International Renewable Energy Agency, he played a pivotal role in shaping the world's renewable energy agenda. He is currently in Abu Dhabi as one of the speakers at the Abu Dhabi International Petroleum Exhibition and Conference. Adnan Z. Amin, thank you very much for joining us today. Adnan, many countries have announced net zero targets, yet continue to expand oil and gas production. From your perspective, does this risk turning the upcoming COP30 into a symbolic forum rather than one that drives real action?
I think the climate discussion now, the international cooperation, the negotiations have resulted in what I think is more or less an unstoppable momentum towards climate action worldwide. An important part of that, of course, is going to be energy. Much of the sources of emissions comes from energy, although some is from agriculture. But on energy, the energy transition is underway. We've seen in the last year, in 2024, we had $2 trillion of investment in clean energy. That was 2/3 of total investment in global energy. So rapid growth. We saw about 580 gigawatts of renewable energy added to the international system. So the impact of decisions that were taken in Paris, taken in Dubai with the UAE consensus, have actually given momentum to this transformation. But the real driver is the economics. Renewables today are the cheapest source of power generation on the grid. We see it around the world. Some markets are moving very fast. China, India, and now I'm very pleased to see decisions that are taking place in Indonesia that are creating a very different perspective for the future. And many major economies, both in the global north and the south, have started to transition in this direction. The challenge for COP30 is going to be, how do we move from a negotiation phase where we were negotiating the rule book for the Paris Agreement, which is now more or less complete? How do we move into an international phase that's driven by international cooperation? And that's going to be the challenge for the Brazilian presidency in terms of how do we design that next phase of climate action.
Now, Adnan, with the growing energy demand driven by AI and digital technologies, how can the world balance the need for more power with the urgency to maintain climate goals?
Well, this is going to be one of the key questions for the future, because we expect that power demand for AI is going to add about 10% of additional demand to the total power demand worldwide. That is very substantial, and that's also focused on a number of markets. So it's much higher by market. Now, what we see is AI demand for electricity, but at the same time, an electrification process that has begun, which shows that the future of the energy system is going to be increasingly electrified. The lowest cost form of energy that's available for electrification is solar and wind. And to some extent, with new technologies, hydro, geothermal, and others, as part of that mix, there's a possibility to go a clean route. In the meantime, demand for oil continues to increase, but we see electric mobility coming in, which is going to be growing exponentially quickly. We're already seeing elements of that in a number of markets. I think Indonesia is one of them, where electric mobility is going to become increasingly dominant and begin to slowly impact oil demand. So how we're looking at the future is that the energy transition can drive a much cleaner future, but it's going to depend on how we are able to ensure that capital reaches the markets that it needs to reach, especially in the global south, for the kind of investments that need to be made.
Well, how effective is energy diplomacy today when national economic interests often hinder collective green transition efforts?
I think that you have short-term decisions that are being taken on political basis. Economics, however, has its own logic, and the economics shows us that investment in the green economy of the future is the way to go. And if there was an article by Newsweek yesterday, a news report, that looking at the index of clean technology funds, those have achieved a much higher rate of growth than any other set of stocks, including NVIDIA, around close to 50%. So I think investors are beginning to see the logic of that. And it is when capital decides to move in a certain direction and investors see that the future looks different is when change begins to happen. And I think we are at the beginning of that moment now.
And now, Mr. Amin, what role can Southeast Asia, particularly Indonesia, play in promoting climate justice and accelerating clean energy cooperation across regions such as ASEAN, Europe, and also the Middle East?
Well, today we are seeing reports of the impact of the storms in the eastern Philippines. Immense human impact, immense suffering. The severity of storms has increased as a result of climate trends. Climate impacts are beginning to affect everybody around the world. So climate justice means governments understanding that the future of their populations has a lot to do with how we manage the climate and to take those measures to make sure that they are also socially equitable. Now, in terms of energy, what we're seeing in Southeast Asia is actually quite remarkable. When I was the founding director general of IRENA, I remember it was just over 10 years ago, we posited a plan for ASEAN to achieve 30% renewable energy penetration by 2030. We are 5 years ahead of 2030, and we are virtually there. And I think new plans in ASEAN have even higher ambition. So this is a remarkable growth. Indonesia is a great example because Indonesia is an oil-producing country. But at the same time, we've seen recent decisions for electrification of the islands that rely on solar, for increasing renewable energy shares in the power mix, in the electrification, increasing electrification in Indonesia, that really indicate very positive things for the future. And we're seeing that in different parts of Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia. All of these markets are beginning to move fast on that. So I think that's excellent. I think what is of concern is the kind of geopolitical issues that we see on the international scene that begin to impact issues like critical minerals, supply chains, and trade in clean energy products, potentially increasing the price and decreasing the availability of those products. And I think if we are able to overcome that, then the future for international cooperation is very positive.
Now, on to my final question to you. Considering the evolving global landscape, what realistic expectation should countries like Indonesia have in advancing their climate commitments ahead of the upcoming COP30 in Belém, Brazil, and all the expected outcomes for this year's conference?
As I said, the focus this year really has to be on implementation. We have a few issues still to negotiate. One of those is the global goal and adaptation and how we're going to achieve that. I think the question of future finance is also going to be on the table, and I think that's going to be important. But the real issue for COP30 is how do we enhance international cooperation? How can the multilateral system, which is under such stress, still continue to function? And how do we create a community of international interest that understands that the future of climate action is a common benefit to us all, and that cooperation on implementation is going to be the way that we will be able to achieve that. That's a big challenge. I know that I work with the Brazilian presidency as a special envoy for the Middle East. And I'm pretty confident that the Brazilians have really started to create that implementation matrix, create an action agenda that's impactful, around which actors will really participate in a meaningful way. And that countries still continue to be extremely concerned about climate trends and see an incentive in working together for the future. And I think that's a hopeful part of the potential for COP30.
Well, Chairman of the World Energy Council and former CEO of COP28, Adnan Z. Amin from Abu Dhabi, thank you very much for joining us and talking to us today.